This is I Have No Title and I Must Podcast, the show where we discuss any and all aspects of pop culture that is on our minds. We are your hosts, Tyler
and Chris,
and we have managed to trick Becky into coming back with us again.
Yeah, just mention horror and I'm in.
And before we get started, I want to remind everyone to give a like to this video, subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment, or else, I don't know, I'll TP your house on Halloween or something. Anyway,
we know where you live.
We're going to continue with spooky season and talk a little bit more about the horror genre itself. And I think the best place to start is, why is horror so cultivating to us anyway, if being afraid is generally seen as not good?
I think that Wes Craven once said that horror films are a safe way to experience our fears. You know, we go to the theater and generally we know that we're safe there. We're surrounded by people. We're in a safe setting and we can just kind of imagine all of those fears without having to actually experience them. So I would say that's part of the big pull for most people, is getting to get the adrenaline rush and the excitement of the fear, but not actually being in danger. And so that's where we can confront our monsters.
Yeah, it's the same with skydiving and any kind of adrenaline junkie people who go out and do these dangerous, scary things. It's no different, really. You're just sitting in a room and then you get these chills, and yeah, there's something, I think, it's a morbid fascination. We're all born, and whether you say you're afraid of death or you're not afraid of death, there would have to be something in you that is both repellent and compelling about the thought of death, which is at the core, either putting your life in danger or actually dying is at the core of this, or going on forever. Which, if you're made into a vampire or a zombie, the thought of becoming something that you should not be.
Yeah, so now to think about it, like, that was a curiosity. Like, even people in the churches, there's still many of them decorated with like bones and skulls and stuff.
Memento Mori.
Yeah.
Yes. A lot of people back in the day kept a Memento Mori, which was a reminder of death, like on their desk or somewhere in their home, to just remind them that death is the inevitable.
I think that's a bigger tradition still in Europe. There's a lot of, like in Paris, there's that church that's just like nothing but bones.
Oh, there's the catacombs. Yeah,
the catacombs too. Yeah,
I think in like Romania, Czech Republic, and Poland, and those regions.
Well, yeah, and it's because they've been ravaged by war even up until 70 years ago was the last, and now again. That's just, I think, in what I was saying is, in other parts of the world, there's a comfort with death that maybe, I don't know how other cultures, I know they love horror movies just like we do, and I mean the Italians especially, and Mexicans in Mexico. Guillermo del Toro, one of our current masters of horror, and they have a special Halloween that's like super Halloween. It's not even on Halloween. If they wanted to do Halloween, they'd do that. And then they have another one. So, yeah, Mexicans have a special relationship with death, having a day of the dead.
Dia de los Muertos.
And, so I think Americans have this, it's an extra fear because it's taboo. It's more taboo than anywhere else maybe in the world. That's just, I'm not I can't think of the word. I can't think of anthropologist. Yeah. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not an expert in like all cultures or whatever. This is just speculation from the anecdotal evidence that I've seen and know about.
And also it ties into that in a way that horror can be escapism from the dredges and horror of real life, that sometimes we seek it out as an escape.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, Tyler, to relax, will pull out his snifter of brandy and after a long, stressful day, tell his wife to put on Hostel, specifically that eyeball scene. And then he doesn't even finish the movie because he just falls asleep there watching it.
You could make the argument that you might want to watch the most horrific thing that you can find to be like, well, at least that didn't happen to me.
Yeah. I didn't get turned into one of those sparkly vampires. Just the regular ones.
Or a walrus.
Whoa. That's far worse fate. That's worse than the eyeball scene. And did you see what they did to Johnny Depp's nose? Good God. Okay. So, you want to go over the genres specifically of we're discussing the horror platform genre in general, but also what some of the subgenres might be.
How all-encompassing that horror can be, you know.
Because you can take any genre, really, and then also turn it into a horror movie. But then horror in general also has its own subcategories.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, the first thing I wrote down was your classic monsters. For me, I have very early childhood memories of watching the old B movies and like the Universal monsters when I was very, very young. So, you know, you have your classics, your Universal monsters like Bela Lugosi's Dracula, Boris Karloff's Frankenstein. You got the Wolfman, the Creatures of Black Lagoon, you know, and all the B movies from back in that era. And then that leads into, you know, your modern day. We try to have modern day takes on monsters with things like Cloverfield and Super 8. And then do we count, you know, just vampires and werewolves and zombies as monsters?
All the streaming platforms do. If it has a vampire werewolf, automatically a horror movie.
That's weird.
Yeah.
And then there's also, we tried to have they've kind of become their own group that are always seen together playing poker on t-shirts around the world. Freddy, Jason, Mike Myers, which I think the jury's still out on if Michael Myers is supernatural or not. I think there's two camps about that. But he still counts as a horrific being.
Yeah, I did have slashers as its own category, but those are a type of monster.
Trods the line. Well, and, I mean, Freddy's a slasher, but he's a monster. He's a supernatural being. Jason's definitely a supernatural being, right? Mm. Like, he was raised from the dead.
Yeah, we don't really know how he is, but he definitely is. He always
got
comes
that
back.
one teleportation thing, and he can get shot in the face.
Is Jason like the inverse Harry Potter? Like his mother's love turned him like into this evil being instead of protection from evil.
I had never really thought of that, but that is an interesting idea, you know, because it is Mrs. Voorhees was the original killer, not Jason, and then her hatred and everything is like what bleeds through Jason and makes him kill at her behest. So she's the real monster. Jason is almost the puppet.
There should be. Have they done one where she comes back and is the killer again? They haven't. They've always just leaned into like Jason in space. Yeah. Jason fights the leprechaun. Jason takes Cairo.
I think that's my problem with like slasher movies in general.
There's one serious one, and then the rest are parodies of themselves.
It's like the first one in the series. It's like, we don't have a lot of money, so we have to just really nail it to get people in. And then from there, it's just like, all right, how do we one-up ourselves?
And it's always just, it's a more ridiculous factor.
Yeah.
Because, there's also the leprechaun.
From the hood.
And Chucky, you know, and there's a lot of things that fit into that category. But,
guys, if you work at a place you hate... All right, this is to our listening audience, not you guys. But if you work at a place you hate, if you're talking about a coworker that you don't like, and just satirically say like, yeah, he's a really good guy, you know, like Chucky. Anyway, that's a freebie. It's not good. That's why it's free. Okay.
When you get into that category, especially with the slashers with Michael and Jason, it's like they do keep rewriting their rules, and it is interesting. You know, the Mrs. Voorhees was the original killer, and she gets decapitated, spoiler alert, at the end of the first movie, and Jason keeps her head, you know, in some of the subsequent films he has a little altar set up to her, but she will appear in his mind and everything, but she never actually comes back. So how is it that Jason keeps getting resurrected and can carry on killing for her, but she can't do it herself? So yeah, it's
reasons.
interesting. Yeah.
That bothers me less than the general lack of creativity. I would say, like, bring her back and do a new kind of story, or a different story rather than what they've done before. Take it, you know, even if it's just they keep remaking Halloween. Isn't there like 3 Halloween movies in one year made by 3 different people, or was it just 2, or was it one was a sequel reboot? And no,
there were the Rob Zombie movies, and then there was a break, and then the cursed David Gordon Green took over and made this new trilogy.
So there's 3 made by one guy?
Yeah, David Gordon Green did this new trilogy that was Halloween 2018, Halloween Kills, and then Halloween Ends. And Halloween Ends basically ruined the franchise for me. So
I'm remembering Danny McBride did something. Did Danny McBride make a Halloween movie?
He co-produced these David Gordon Green movies.
So there were just the
David
3.
Gordon Green
are
was
those the final
main.
3 movies?
Yes. And
Why
now
don't
they're
we
going to have to hard reboot again and try to undo what David Gordon Green did. And then David Gordon Green did this new Exorcist movie, which I didn't even bother to see because he does nothing but piss on the established franchises and movies that he gets his hands on, and I want no part of it.
Yeah. There was, so I'll rip this Band-Aid off because one of the subgenres and categories we were discussing prior to going on air was something that I just called fun. That's not really horrific or scary. But one thing that I forgot to mention with you guys, I said Werewolf by Night. If, you know, like, Disney's going to put that under their, you know, like, horror categories if they have one, a real one at least, because they don't. It's, you know, horror for kids, which that one might even have some real, like, scary scenes you wouldn't want your 6-year-old watching, but I think all of us were watching horror movies at 6 because they just played them on TV, and they were everywhere.
The Saturday Groovy Movie on Channel USA.
You would slip in your VHS rental because it was in a box that looked like everything else in with the other movies that your parents were renting on Friday night, and then you would have a scary movie with either by yourself or to watch with some friends or your family, or, you know, brothers and sisters, not family. So, but for some reason, what didn't come to mind is something like Beetlejuice, which was one of really, like, when I began to fall in love with the macabre, not necessarily horror for horror's sake, but just dark things, which a lot of people just assume that I love horror and consume all the horror genre all the time, and everything has to be super dark all the time. But then they're like, you listen to jazz? Not easy listening. That's nothing but hard listening. Or like, I only listen to heavy metal, and then I'm like, but have you heard of David Bowie? Have you heard Let's Dance? And then when I slam that on, they're like, this guy is a mystery. But Becky here, who does consume all of the everything, and you do love Tim Burton, or at least, you know, like
my boyfriend and I. Shout out to Ben. Hi, boo. We figured out last week when we watched Crimson Peak that Guillermo del Toro is elevated Tim Burton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to argue with that.
Yeah. That's basically like Tim Burton does. I mean, his stuff sort of has a horror elements to it, definitely, but there's always that sense of fun. Tim Burton always makes it a little bit more fun, more campy, more outside the lines, but Guillermo del Toro is going to make it a little bit more artsy, more deeply rooted in horror.
Yeah, definitely that.
They have similar styles, but Guillermo del Toro's is definitely more horror and it's elevated.
Yeah, like Edward Scissorhands and Pinocchio are basically, which I don't know how old the story of Pinocchio is, even though there were like 5 versions of Pinocchio that were put out last year. I probably should have done some research on that. Also, some of the things I say are satirical, so don't think I'm getting my facts wrong, but when they're obviously wrong on purpose. But they're basically outgrowths, or at least modern retellings, of Frankenstein, especially Edward Scissorhands. It's like he literally can't touch anything without without destroying it. Frankenstein has a similar problem. If it's something that requires brute force or strength, he can plow a field over in the middle of winter overnight. But if it's like gently caressing someone without harming them, he can't do it. And yes,
which
I definitely
exactly goes to that scene in Edward Scissorhands where Winona Ryder's character says, "Hold me," and he says, "I can't."
Yeah, and I'm specifically referring to the Benedict Cumberbatch version of Frankenstein, which no one will have seen because it was exclusive to people being tortured in England by Danny Boyle. That's all I'll say about that because I want to stay positive. During this horrific season of horrors.
But yeah, when you go to the category of like dark comedy and like fun horror, again, you know, where do you categorize that? Because would you include things like you mentioned, you know, Shaun of the Dead? We're talking about Tim Burton movies that they would fit into that category.
No, Shaun of the Dead does go hard. It saves it, and that's a perfect movie. That's a rare perfect film. Tim Burton, though, has fallen from grace in recent years by working on properties that were pre-existing, like Planet of the Apes. Big Eyes was based on a book, but that one was good, though it was unlike most anything you've seen.
So Sleepy Hollow.
Definitely, but I don't know if people are divided about that or are just like, it's Tim Burton, but I really like that version, even though it's quite different.
It's a great thing to put on this time of year. It's a great thing to watch. It's very atmospheric and enjoyable.
Yeah, and it's got some good horror stuff in it. Like some of those decapitations, some of them they trod that line between like ugh and funny. And if you're not used to that, it's still gonna get you. Peregrines was the other one I was gonna cite for not being good, not following the source material very well. You have to really not have read the book at all or not know anything about it to maybe enjoy that, but I wouldn't know because I did read all the books at the time and I wasn't happy with it. But if you just go back and look at like Beetlejuice. Have you seen all the Beetlejuice merchandise? Like people
it's all over Spirit Halloween. You walk into Spirit Halloween, you're going to see Beetlejuice everywhere.
Which isn't indicative of whether something's good or not, but Beetlejuice, like show me the flaw in Beetlejuice. I was mesmerized by that when I was a kid and I think it still holds up. It keeps getting funnier every time I watch it. And
I see what you did there.
I mean, everyone's good in it. And like, it's like this all-star cast of people who are super like maybe like the B-list, you know, like really great character actors and people who are well known at the time. Anyway.
And then also I want to mention we had discussed a little bit before we came on air. Do you include things like, you know, Happy Death Day? I don't know if anybody else here saw that one, but there's so much humor in it. It's literally like this girl keeps waking up on the day that she dies and trying to figure out who her killer is and stop it.
So she's getting murdered every time? We get this horror movie.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
It is,
where does
but
it go?
It's real. Yeah, it's real campy and it's really funny. And you know, she at a certain point she just gets pissed off and is just.
It might be one of that I didn't see it, so it's really hard for me to say. But that could be something that's.
And then they did that
satirical.
Freaky Friday parody thing that made it horror with Vince Vaughn as the killer, and I never saw that. But again, it's something that starts out. It's supposed to be like humorous, but then they bring the horror element into it, and so yeah, we see a lot of that trend. And then of course you have just straight up horror parody things like Scary Movie and
it goes without
stuff
saying.
like that.
Yeah.
So, but they all branched off from true horror.
What's your favorite genre of horror?
My favorite genre of horror is the one that probably translates the least into film, and that's kind of the Lovecraftian horror. With all of H.P. Lovecraft's flaws, don't Google it.
I'm not going to break eye contact with you, even if you're not looking at me.
I'm waiting for Chris to say it. I'm just waiting.
No.
Keep waiting.
I would say H.P. Lovecraft himself is a very flawed individual, and even his writing style is very diverse. Some people think it's great. Some people think it's lazy writing. I think that's why it doesn't translate well to film, because the whole concept of cosmic horror is that there is something so maddening and insane that your mind breaks because it cannot comprehend it. But if you have something on film, then obviously we can comprehend it because we have created.
Yeah, it's the paradox.
Yeah.
It's just like angels.
Yeah.
What do angels look like? Everyone conjured up a certain kind of image, and if you're listening, you did too. Now, go look up H.P. Lovecraft's cat and biblical
He was gonna
biblically
get it in
accurate
there.
angels, biblically accurate angels, and then click on images, and you'll be like, not in my Bible.
Yeah.
So what does look like in your mind?
Well, I think we have like the squid face kind of structure with like the huge wings, but that's probably because people have attempted to draw it so much. I think like one of the reasons like the cosmic horror works so much in literature and storytelling is because it is so vague. Anyone can borrow from it and expand on it, and they have, and that's why it is considered a mythos instead of fan fiction. Why something even like Tolkien stuff, as in-depth of a world he has created, it has not branched off into a mythos. Like it's just, this is the world, this is how it is. But with Lovecraft, it's almost like the Greek gods pantheon. It's like everything is slightly changed a little bit and adapted for all these different things. And so that kind of leads us to allow our minds to do their own work, because what scares us most is the things that we conjure ourselves. Because as soon as you see it and you can put a label to it, it could be horrifying, but it's already less scary because you're telling me that's the scariest thing that you can come up with. Whereas my mind is going to delve in deeper.
And it's going to be different for everybody.
Exactly.
It's going to be whatever door was waiting for the doctor behind.
Like some things I think kind of do okay with it, like Event Horizon, I think kind of rides that line of, and so does like The Color Out of Space, which is an actual straight up
Haven't seen that yet,
adaptation.
but it's on the watch list.
Like it actually does a fair job with it, because some things you can see and you see the strangeness, but it's more the people's reactions to it that you're seeing than some of the other things that makes it better than some of the other attempts, I think.
Just this week, your points about that are great. Just this week, I'm still in my rewatch of Doctor Who, since the soft reboot from Christopher Eccleston. I'm up to Capaldi's first season, and I just a few days ago watched Listen, which is one of my, so far, I mean, there's a lot of really good episodes with Capaldi, and we'll obviously get into more of that when we get to the actual 60th anniversary next month. But Listen was such a great episode, and it's exactly what you're talking about, because it's based on, the plot is, what if there was a creature that could have perfect hiding, perfect stealth, and just exist, and he goes all over the place looking for something that is possibly with him at all times in the dark, and he would never know. And there's one shot where they kind of show it, but it's out of focus and just and heavily obscured, but it's this weird shaped head that you only see kind of part of. But is that the blur from the bokeh being out of focus? And it's just a regular person. And then Clara even says, was that just a kid under a blanket making fun of us? But it's left to your imagination. It gives you the chills. I think there's a lot of horror movies that are, you walk out of it and you analyze it and say like, oh my God, that was the greatest horror movie of all time. Well, what was scary about it? You didn't even see anything. There was nothing shown. Like the less is more, and the more you can't or don't show, quote the Raven, nevermore.
And I still hold that it is an elder being.
Yeah, I think nobody would. Yeah, there's a huge fan theory that is the case. And that's if it isn't, it's clearly Stephen King was trying to build his own pantheon based on H.P. Lovecraft's work. Maybe even trying to modernize it with a rational, sane mind. Not to say that Stephen King is rational or sane.
He also has talked about within his work there are inscapes. He calls them inscapes, and they are kind of almost like parallel realities. And then Joe Hill has also started to put those in his works as well. And he did that with Horns, because the treehouse of the mind that Iggy discovers is not in our reality. It exists in a different reality.
Sounds a lot like Lovecraft's dreamscapes.
Yeah, so obviously these things go back to that Lovecraftian horror as well.
So yeah, Google H.P. Lovecraft's bio at your own risk.
Oh, especially his poetry.
He was a complicated
His poetry
man.
and his cat.
I'm not conflating you and him. You brought him up, but that can segue over into sci-fi fantasy.
Horror, sci-fi
because you
horror,
mentioned Tolkien, and I don't think anybody is going to put Tolkien or the Lord of the Rings into a horror category. It's clearly fantasy, but I mean like giant spiders attacking you and stringing you up inside of a fully formed web that somebody else has to cut you out of, having to throw a ring, and a magic ring going into lava to keep a giant monster from coming back to life. Sounds like the plot of a horror movie. Mm-hmm. So, and I mean, parts of that have been suspense horror movies on their own. That was the spider thing.
Yeah,
was a big part
and
of
if we're going to count Tolkien, also Harry Potter, you know? I mean, it's dark magic.
That's too, I think Harry Potter's too fun.
Yeah, but I mean, the villains are Death Eaters, and if you go back to like Fantastic Beasts with Grindelwald, he wanted to start a war with the Muggles and basically like cleanse the earth of Muggles, you know, have the world be for dark wizards.
Wait, was that Grindelwald or H.P. Lovecraft? I'm sorry.
Maybe H.P. Lovecraft is represented in Grindelwald.
So needy. Yeah. So, do you think that the Predator is kind of like the real world? Was it? Do you think that it was slightly based on
Cthulhu?
Or not? Not even. I think yes. The image of him does conjure that up, but also he's invisible. So for a time, you're left with not knowing what it. Does it? How far into the movie does it actually? In the first movie, the original.
I don't think it actually shows him
until the very end?
Like that last kind of little bit there.
So I don't remember the original trailer from like the 80s, but could you have been watching that movie and get well into it and think, we're not going to see the monster? Because that's a possibility. And then they finally do show him, and I think it holds up.
Yeah.
It's an iconic modern monster, but in the sense that like it's not supernatural, it's an alien. So it's just a real thing that could happen with some military guys. So obviously it's science fiction.
Yeah.
So that's same with Aliens. But Aliens, I think Aliens, all that franchise originally leaned more into cosmic horror, you know, like an alien that is so horrific and it's suspense themed.
And then a modern take on that would be arguably, I think it should fit in, is Moon. That movie Moon that Sam Rockwell was in.
Mm-hmm. David Bowie's son, Duncan Jones, directed that and I think wrote it. I could be wrong about the writing.
Is that the one where he's like stranded by himself on a lunar base?
By himself,
Yes.
with himself?
Yeah.
Yes.
I started that one, but I have not.
That one's definitely it. I still remember watching it and getting so sucked into it and having all these paranoid feelings while watching it.
There's few actors that could pull it off because it's not quite a bottle film. There's different locations on the base, but it's just Sam Rockwell.
Yeah. I kind of made the mistake of starting it during lockdown, and I'm like, can't do it.
Yeah, no. I think I watched it during lockdown too.
I probably did too then, because I think I borrowed it from you after you watched it. You talked me into watching it. So probably, yeah, we all probably watched it around the same time.
I enjoyed it. It's not one that I would watch again. I'll just say that. There's also another one that Duncan Jones did that I have not watched yet, and I keep meaning to, and it's got a fairly horrific beginning to it, and I don't know where it goes. But a guy is mute. He gets something bad happens to him in the very beginning, and yeah. So Duncan Jones hasn't made that many films, and I think another one was based on a video game that was not well received. But that one has mixed reviews, and Moon has generally, I think, positive reviews. So yeah, but that one's more of like a suspense. It's more Lynchian. It's more just like weird and off-putting, and you don't really know what's happening until the end. And I say Lynchian or Kafkaesque, but with Lynch films, you still don't know what's happening.
And that sort of goes into elevated horror. You know, these things that are hard to define as like your standard horror movies sometimes. Sometimes they have very common themes. Like Robert Eggers, for example, did The Witch, and that's all about religious superstition, witchcraft, all of that. But then he did The Lighthouse, which is much more vague and doesn't have a stereotypical horror theme. But if you watch it, it's pretty horrific. And same thing again, my boyfriend and I were discussing if The Northman is a horror film or not.
I did not see that one.
Because it's, again, it's Robert Eggers, and it is that classic Viking tale of vengeance, but it leans into things like dark magic and visions and just elements of the Norse religion. It gets into Norse spirituality. It treats the gods and the Valkyrie and everything. They are real in this world, but it is very much at its heart, it's very Shakespearean. It's very similar to Hamlet.
Well, isn't that where Shakespeare originally got the idea from? That Norse tale?
Possibly. So maybe it's just taking it back to its origins.
Yeah, I think that's
If
what it
Shakespeare
is.
was a real person.
Yeah.
Didn't rip some of his stuff off of Christopher Marlowe.
I think The Northman is more of a dark, epic fantasy, and The Lighthouse is just a cautionary tale of why you don't drink kerosene.
With Willem Dafoe.
Yeah.
It's probably not a good idea to drink anything with Willem Dafoe.
Not even water.
You don't know what's going to happen. That honky crazy. I love Willem Dafoe. I absolutely
We all do. We all do. We all love Willem Dafoe.
If I could think of, oh my God, just like everything Willem Dafoe in is awesome, even if it's just because he's in it. And if you watch Julian Schnabel's movie about Vincent van Gogh that has him in it, it's a hard watch, but it's well worth it because of his act. And I only say that because he leans into showing his mental instability. So, well, that sci-fi one went badly because we went all over the place. But I mean, like, is David Lynch? David Lynch is never like, people are pretty divided about like what. It's like some of his films are clearly not horror, like the one about the old grandpa who drives on a lawnmower to go see his brother or something. That's not a horror movie, but like Twin Peaks, even as a show or a movie.
I think, at least from the internet, Eraserhead and Twin Peaks are the ones classified as horror specifically.
Now, like, even with Eraserhead, it feels more just like a dream, like a nightmare for sure. So, like, that's a horror movie, right? And it's like weird, but it's just weird.
Yeah.
And weird, I really want to, and hopefully the 5 people listening to me right now, all at once, as if you guys pretend you're all listening to it at the exact same moment. We're all like just kind of.
I'm going to stop you and say that 3 of the 5 people that listen to you are right here, right now.
There's a third person.
We have a new subscriber. We have one new one.
All right.
I brought on board.
Ben's daughter. Listen up. All right. Because I really want to start this with a younger generation.
Alex.
Weird. You know, like when you go to school and you're like, oh, that's weird because like somebody put glue on their hand. It didn't used to mean that. It used to mean like vampires. Like if a vampire were real, if you were like the grave last night that we dug, it's empty. And they're like, how do you know it's empty? Because there's a hole there and there's nobody in it. And we buried somebody. Oh my God, that's weird. There was a comic book entitled Weird Tales, but it wasn't like a guy goes to work and forgets his briefcase and is like, oh, that's weird. Or like you turn on TV and somebody's singing a parody of a song and he calls himself weird because he's wearing like a Hawaiian shirt, but he's not in Hawaii. That's not weird. Weird used to mean the most horrific things, like you go to work but your work is haunted and you can't get any work done because you're running away from a ghost all day or your sociopathic boss. So I say we exclude the word weird from our vocabulary unless it's about the most extreme things. Like if you bring up David Lynch, say like that guy's weird, and then we start to think of Al Yankovic as like kinda strange Al Yankovic, but only even kinda. Because that guy's semi-abnormal,
weird, or semi-abnormal.
It's hard,
Al
right?
Yankovic.
That's right. His propaganda got to you. He's a great musician, though. He's still a good guy. I want to see him. I haven't. I want to.
Sarah has.
Has she?
Yeah.
That bitch. Sarah's Tyler's wife, just so everybody knows.
To clarify.
And she knows that I was kidding.
She ain't gonna listen to this. She don't know.
She will if we'll know if she's really listening after I've desecrated the name of her beloved author, H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, that's right. I said it about Herbert. Go look it up.
I think that's why she encourages the podcast so much, is because I talk to you guys instead of her.
She's just daring you to say that cat's name. Look me in the eye and say that cat's name.
Then the real horror begins.
Okay. What do we? There's still horror movies that are absolutely not horror movies. The one that I tell people that I recommend to people the most, that I say like I watched it one time and I'll never watch it again. I've told my girlfriend to watch it. I've told other people to watch it.
So are we saying like movies that aren't horror but are horrifying? Or are we talking about like movies that are labeled as horror but shouldn't be?
Okay, maybe. Well, I'm not sure what this one would be labeled under. So you tell me, because it's going to be suspense thriller. And that's when I say like, yes, they're clearly labeled that. But a lot of this is up for debate, because to me, the scariest thing, I don't go out, when I go walking after the sun goes down, I don't think, oh no, a werewolf's going to get me. I think, what if somebody comes up and murders me? Except I try not to think that. But here's the thing, because that's actually like news propaganda. You know, the news wants to scare you. So they're going to tell you like crime is on the rise, even if it's actually a pretty rare occurrence. The thing that really scares me is the fact that someone could be so manipulative in your everyday life that they could control every aspect of your life. And Arlington Road with Tim Robbins and Jeff Bridges. If you say a movie with Tim Robbins and Jeff Bridges, they're alone. That's a powerhouse duo. And I can't remember who plays their wives. That's terrible. I'm sorry. Either. I did not pass the Bechdel test in this podcast, but damn, is that movie gripping to the very end? And like, I don't even want to say anything about it because like anything spoils it. You probably shouldn't even watch a trailer, but it's not a horror movie, but it's the scariest scenario to me that narcissists exist, they are real, and their powers of manipulation and to intuitively tap into other people's psyche and subconscious and just make them believe their lies and control everything around you. To me, in real life, and I have witnessed this and I have been the victim of it, it feels supernatural. Because it's real and it works. There is an extreme version of that in Arlington Road. What's the one? Single white female?
Single white female is another great example of that. I didn't write it down, but it would definitely be in that category, and one that I think of when I think about movies like that. Arlington Road, Single White Female, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle was one.
Was there a breastfeeding scene in that? That's weird.
I think so.
Well, we kind of discussed this a little bit beforehand too, but like Nightcrawler rides that line. I don't think I'd classify
Jake Gyllenhaal?
Yeah. I don't think I'd classify it as a horror, but his actions and disregard for everything else except what he's doing is kind of horrifying.
Yeah.
And if we're going to say that, then do we also include something, and Chris is going to hate me for bringing up this movie, but The Lovely Bones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's such a hard watch, and it's horrific. It was based on a book. I read the book first and then stupidly decided to go see the movie. And it literally is a young girl who gets murdered, and it's told through her narrative in the book, and you see it through her eyes in the movie. She gets murdered, and then the rest of the book and the movie is her having to watch not only what her death does to her family and her community and the grief and the aftermath of that, but knowing that the killer, that this man, this pedophile, this monster of a person is hiding in plain sight, and that there's other vulnerable girls.
Okay, so with that, it's a beautiful movie and it's well acted, except for who's the dad?
Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah, because Mark Wahlberg
doesn't do justice to that character.
Yeah, he's not the expert in the thespian arts. But that one, I'm going to put it in a different category, and that's depressing as just like The Fault in Our Stars. We're like, oh my God, they found each other. Yeah, and it was depressing as And if you like leaving, if you need a
Greek porn,
it's like you don't necessarily feel like crying afterward. It's just like it's just difficult to sit through. Like Zach Braff's recent film,
A Good Person.
Good film, but damn, I did not.
Well, that was Florence Pugh. So Florence Pugh is always going to sell the devastating emotions to you.
Zach Braff wrote and directed that.
For Florence Pugh. For Florence Pugh. He wrote that character specifically to show off Florence Pugh's amazing acting skills.
Whatever. Anyway, I don't think The Lovely Bones, it's supernatural in the way that every like Christian horror movie is, like Left Below or whatever. It's like there is an afterlife. That's the extent of the supernatural portion of it. It's just sad and depressing, and people get R'd and A'd and est and other things that'll like get us demonetized. Wait, did we get monetized?
No, this is just for fun.
Don't tell that. Now they think they don't have to pay us.
Okay.
Okay, pay us.
All right. So I'm also.
Please send your donations.
If this is, we need to start something like a softball league or actually, I'm going to start, anybody, please, I'm going to start at my job that I work at, terrible craft store retail domain. I'm going to start a wine drinking club. It'll be every day from around 11:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. in the parking lot of the next door Harbor Freight. Anybody who wants to join me, bring your own wine and bring me some wine. And the bucket we used to spit in will not be present. So what do we got? I think so. Another big modern one is the found footage. That's one that was made. I don't think Blair Witch did it first.
I think they're just the one that popularized it.
Yeah, and there was so they had the best marketing strategy campaign for that movie ever. Is before the internet was really big. It existed, of course, but people couldn't get on and spread the word to each other like this is fake. It was just word of mouth with teenagers in high school all across America in the 90s. It was a different world back then. There was ska on TV and the radio. You could just turn on and hear like Jump, Jive, and Wail, and also Gregorian chants for some reason. It was crazy. It wasn't just all the same pop music. So everybody thought this movie was real. There was like, some people were like, no, right? That can't be real. But everybody else, all these dumb kids were like, oh my God, you got to go see the Blair Witch. It's real. It really happened. Nobody knows what happened to him. And then at the MTV Music Awards, the three guys just showed up and they were like, we're alive. And everybody was like,
I remember people saying that the fake out was that it was fake. You know, I remember people saying, oh, well, they didn't want to promo it, you know, like they originally promoted that it's real, but then they wanted to back off of that because who wants to go and see it if it's real? And so then they started saying it was fake so that people would go see it.
Yes.
So it was all these layers. It was like the rumor mill of like the kid from Mikey Likes It from Life Cereal or whatever was dead, or like Alfonso Ribeiro was supposed to be dead. Like when I was a kid, somebody said he died, and, you know, but it was like that. There were layers of the lie with that marketing campaign. And then I do remember when they started to make public appearances, which ties in interestingly to, I don't think it counts as found footage or whatever. I haven't actually watched it, but Cannibal Holocaust was so real.
yeah.
And the guy had the idea. I remember seeing the real guy, the director, recently on a program on Shudder, and he was saying, you know, he had all the actors and things sign a thing saying they would not be in any other movies or make any public appearances for like a year after the film because he wanted people to think they were dead. And then that bit him in the ass because he ended up having to go to court and prove that he only made a movie and didn't actually murder anyone. That the actors were just actors. No one was really dead. And yeah, there was a whole court case about it. So that may have been the most blurred line in history in the horror genre was Cannibal Holocaust.
Animal cruelty in the video was
real. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I don't want to watch the movie is that part was real, but the actors, they were still alive.
Found footage is one of those I really like the idea of, but just cannot get into.
Yeah, in practice, it feels like oftentimes you're just waiting for the jump scare, especially with the modern ones with like Paranormal Activity. I haven't seen Blair Witch in a long time, but at the time, yeah, if you're young and dumb, which I'm assuming nobody in our listening audience is, but Blair Witch I didn't think was scary at the theater. It was when I got home later that night and I was just sitting by myself, listening to all the creaks and sounds and thinking I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Like that feeling lingered with me. And that's when, and I called some friends and I was like, I just need to talk to somebody because it's just weird in here right now. And they're like, Blair Witch got to you, didn't it? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, it's not one that scares you then, it scares you later.
That's how I felt about The Sixth Sense. When I watched it, I'm like, that wasn't really scary. It's a pretty good movie, though. Then later that night, I was the only one awake, and I had to go pee. I'm like looking over my shoulder the entire time, making sure that girl ain't walking past me.
Or that kid. Ugh.
Yeah.
Which one? The one in the tent?
No, Haley Joel Osment. Got him. Got him. He's a good guy, though. I don't know.
I see dead people.
Oh, well, you just brought up a huge name, M. Night Shyamalan, which we didn't discuss off air at all. And do you even have, he's the one of your favorite directors. I don't think you have anything of your on it. Do you? Ain't that a bitch?
Apologies to Shama Mammal.
About one of your favorite. Of course, I guess he's a flash in the pan now, and you've moved on to Ari Aster. But I mean, he's been a big name in this. Like Sixth Sense. Like some of his movies are not natural. They're do you count Unbreakable? Unbreakable is not a horror movie, and even his normal movies are unnerving, weird sort of thing. And I'm using weird the way that I intend, but like The Village, it's like there's okay. Spoilers for a 25-year-old movie, I think, at this point now. So spoilers for Village, skip forward like 15 seconds if you don't want to hear the end. But the twist is there is no monster. And that's the
humans
twist.
Are the monster. That's the twist.
It's
and that their fear itself is the real monster.
Yeah, it's modern society. Living in modern society was too much for them, and they had to
so they had to isolate themselves and create monsters to keep themselves prisoner.
Yeah, an open-air prison in the woods that they gather up enough money to be able to maintain this, but can they? That's now. And
I will defend The Village till the day that I die, because I think that Shyamalan was making social commentary about we make each other monsters. This was, I think, was it post 9/11? And people want to see monsters in their fellow human beings. And
that is probably where he was going with that.
Yes. And I think he did a wonderful job of saying that we will actually create a worse fate for ourselves if we're so afraid of each other.
I want to jump back to the found footage, because Shyamalan, after like long after that craze has died out, and it's just like every so often you get a found footage movie. M. Night Shyamalan did a found footage movie, and that was terrifying. I mean, it's Shyamalan, so it's going to be like, there's going to be some droning and some unnerving bits that are hard to sit through, and it's long periods of just what most people are going to say are dullness. But like in the end, where that kid freezes up and he gets a pie in the face, except it's not a pie, and I'm not going to say what it was. Go watch this movie. Like, that is unnerving. And the real twist of the movie, I'm not even gonna spoil this one. If you haven't seen, what's that one called?
The Visit.
The Visit. Yeah, with the grandparents and the kids. It's one of the better found footage movies, I think, because
I don't remember it being found footage.
It technically is, because it's the girl, I think, it's like two kids, one's a little bit younger and one's a little bit older, brother and sister, and she's documenting a thing for school.
Okay. Yeah. See, I had forgotten.
You forgot that it was, because he does it so subtly that and a lot of it feels like just a regular movie, but it is the case, and it is how it is edited afterward that leads into what the ending is, that I won't actually spoil the very, very ending, but I recommend this movie. It's got a lot of layers and elements to it for a horror film, and a lot of people are probably going to be fairly divided. If you got 10 people in a room, you probably get 10 opinions on this film if they've seen it, but I recommend that one. And I did not see Old, because that's
did.
Are we going to gloss over Shyamalan's scariest movie?
Which one is that?
The Last Airbender. Oh my god! Just the acting alone in that was just terrifying.
After Earth could almost be there too. And The Happening. The Happening had potential, but was ruined by bad casting. And
who is the dad in that again?
Marky Mark.
And the Funky Bunch.
Yeah.
He didn't know when he had it good.
He's actually very wealthy, though. He's managed to ride that train into
people going to see his movies. I'm a firefighter in this one. In this one, I'm a retired firefighter. He's worth like $800
million or something. So Marky Mark's done all right for himself. But yeah, and Devil is a great Shyamalan related.
Shyamalan produced that, and people will probably watch it and be like, man, Shyamalan got really good really fast. He wasn't the director. He produced it, and it was supposed to be the beginning. And if you watch it, it still has it on there. It's supposed to be something called the Night Chronicles, which were going to be like maybe movie versions of like Twilight Zone episodes or something, like a series of films, and they never took off. And I guess it was going to be movies that he produced and found other talent to make these movies. The best M. Night Shyamalan movie that isn't an M. Night Shyamalan movie, Devil, and it's a bottle movie too. All takes place in an elevator.
A elevator.
It's really good. It's got like a Shyamalanian twist.
Now I remember that moment in the theater when the specific thing happens and people were just like,
yeah, it gets you and holds you. It fools you. It feels like a Shyamalan movie too. Some of the acting, like a little over the top, like on purpose. The writing and the structure, like it holds you to a certain point, and you think something intense is going to happen, and then it cuts away to a completely other thing. And I'm talking about the specific thing that is some backstory at the end. That's a great film. I forgot about that. I watched that a couple years back. That one holds up. There's not everything we're going to mention is going to hold up. Everybody comment your favorite like horror film that people have forgotten. Not the big ones. Not like, I like Freddy. The ones that are the deep cuts that not everybody knows about or forgets about that should be at the top of everybody's list. Like, was the one where the sheriff and Frailty we were talking about?
Yeah, Frailty's a great example of that.
Frailty is so good. And it's like...
There's a movie called Skeleton Key that had Kate Hudson in it. It's set in New Orleans, kind of hoodoo. And that one had a Shyamalan-esque kind of ending that has burned into my mind and holds up as one of the greatest unsettling endings to a movie, I think. And also, if we're going to talk about Shyamalan, his latest one, Knock at the Cabin, is redemptive for Shyamalan. I think it's redemptive for Shyamalan.
And stars the King of England. Are you going to say anything? Help me out here.
Jonathan Groff?
Jonathan Groff.
Oh, yes, extraordinary.
From Hamilton. And also Dave Bautista and Rupert Grint. But I think Dave Bautista steals the show. Dave Bautista is like the unsung hero
Absolutely.
of Hollywood these days. I love mentioning him when and wherever I can. When he got his first major acting role, he openly tells the story. He cried and immediately signed up for acting lessons because he didn't want to just be another like Hulk Hogan or Roddy Piper or, The Rock, who just like comes in and is themselves. Like, hey, brother, he wanted to be a thespian, an actor.
And it shows.
It does, because he's different in every movie he's in. You compare he didn't come in and is just playing like Drax. He doesn't do that for every other film. Now, is he sometimes a little bit typecast as the big bruiser? That happens, he's gotten into a fight with James Bond and Blade Runner. In this, he's so calm, kind, and gentle that it couldn't have been played by, you could have gotten someone who seems like dangerous the softer they speak. Like, I'm thinking there's the guy from American Beauty. You say his name. I don't want to say his name.
Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, Kevin Spacey. Like in Seven. Is it Seven? Where it's like, this guy seems crazy. You walk in and you're like, oh, this guy is like a bit icky and crazy. You could have had him. You could have been like, ugh. It's like the softer he speaks and the more kinder he gets, the more I want to get the out of this room. But you get Dave Bautista, who like looks intimidating just off the bat. You put him in like a nice suit, nice clothes. He's like busting out of this shirt because, he's so intimidatingly built, and he's nothing but kind.
Yeah, and Shyamalan, he basically had Dave Bautista move in with him and put him through the ringer of like, tell me all your emotional stories. Basically show me your soul, because he needed someone who was an intimidating physical force but had a pure spirit. That's what Shyamalan said he was looking for, because this character gets put into a situation where he is a beautiful, pure soul, but he has to do something horrific that goes against his very nature, and it breaks him to do so. And he needed somebody who could pull that off, and he found it. It's a beautiful film.
Now, this one, it goes into the suspense thriller category.
It's apocalyptic, yes.
Yeah, there's that too.
The apocalyptic theme.
But that's the thing, is that's the twist that's waiting to happen is it real? real, is what they're seeing is real, because the people who are being held hostage, this isn't a spoiler, it's from the trailer at least, they don't believe it because they're in the middle of nowhere and they could have set up to know what was going to be on the news in advance. So because the news plays in a loop and you get the same news like 20 minutes, especially if there's an event, you're going to get that same news story. I mean, you could, if there was somebody who didn't know what was going on in the Middle East right now and I said, I'm going to predict there's going to be an attack in this area, you could flip on the news right now and show it to them and say, I was right. And then they would be like, but did you already know? Because that's how the news works, is it continues to cover the same story. It's a week old. So that's what they think is happening. And it's through the end of the film that you find out whether or not it's completely 100% confirmed or not. And even then, I think there's still debate about the full ramifications.
I've not watched the movie yet or read the book, but from what I've heard, that's where the big dividing line is.
Yeah, it is. And it's a good film. I'd stand by that one.
Yeah, we can't really discuss the differences between the book and the film without
that one's so
the
recent. I don't want to
spoilers.
Yeah, that
we
one's
would
so
have
recent.
to like spoil both endings, and they are quite different.
I don't mind the spoiling the village because it's literally like 47 years old, but
Not quite.
This one's less than a year old.
Yeah.
Didn't we just go see that last
year?
Okay,
Yeah, I think
early this year. I can't remember now. I don't know, when did it come out? Was it in the fall or winter?
That's a good question. I honestly don't remember
Within the
now.
last year or so.
Okay, yeah, within the 12 months at least, I think.
So we'll avoid spoiling that one.
Yeah.
Because it really is worth watching.
If
if you're on the line about Shyamalan,
on.
if you're like, oh, I used to like some of his movies, but then he fell off, this one is redemptive in my eyes. It takes it back to showing that Shyamalan can really be a master of his craft sometimes.
All right, before we get into an end game here, is there a movie that maybe could be construed as this or something along those lines, but that you hate that isn't? I want to go negative for just a minute to say, like, what's something that really irks you in this genre that you're just like, why did they do that? Is it Jason X or Leprechaun in the Hood? For me, I'm going with this one, and it's because it makes a mockery of one person, and it's The Raven. I think I mentioned this when we talked about Poe last week. I don't want to get all into Poe again, and I easily could, but I think I said a lot of it. But what was the Raven? They had you know how many Poe movies we get? Like one every 20 years at this point, because Vincent Price died and he was holding that torch for us, keeping that spirit alive. And then somebody was like, oh, I think I'll write a movie about Edgar Allan Poe. What is it going to be like? Completely fiction. Thanks. And is it going to make any sense? No, actually, I'm going to turn him into Sherlock Holmes. Awesome.
And have John Cusack look absolutely nothing like Poe.
Yeah, and he's got a pet raccoon. He feeds like human brains to it or something. Like, and then he walks around quoting himself to himself by himself. What?
Yeah,
this is awful.
It is terrible.
So
I agree, that one is terrible.
what would what's an awful one? What's a really bad one? As you've seen.
Okay, I'm going to say the most unnecessary thing is when they do remakes that only pale in comparison to the original source material, don't really bring anything new to the table, and end up just...
Oh, I know what a lot of people say.
The Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yep, that's exactly.
I'm wearing my original Nightmare on Elm Street
And you know what's
shirt
sad
right
about
now,
that is it had such potential, because Jackie Earle Haley is the perfect successor to that role for his name escapes me. I'm looking right at
Robert Englund.
Robert Englund. Looking right at his face on your shirt. But yeah, he's Jackie Earle Haley, I think, did a great job. He did not, however, surpass whatever's going on in that movie, but I feel this.
Yeah, I mean, that movie was a victim of, they had potential, in my opinion. Like when I first saw the trailers and stuff, I was optimistic that they were going to do a twist and have Freddy Krueger actually be innocent and not be the Springwood slasher, and that he was falsely murdered by the neighborhood, and that's when he turns evil and is like, okay, you wanted to make me this, I will be this, and I will come in the dreams and kill your children. That would have been interesting. But no, they just rehashed the same old, but made it so just poorly, and terrible dialogue. There's literally a part where after several of their friends have died and they know what's going on, they know about Freddy Krueger and all that one of the characters says to the other's character, you just had a bad dream. And it's like, no, they know at that point that And it was like that show Medium that I used to watch with Patricia Arquette, and she was a psychic, and all the time, like, her psychic predictions would be true. And then every time she would have some premonition or dream or something, her husband would be trying to talk her down and be like, no, you're just, it's just a nightmare, or just a weird feeling that you're having, that everything's fine. And it got so dull after a while that it's like, no, aren't you on board by now? She's a medium. She's psychic. This stuff happens. And that's the way this Nightmare remake was. But the worst one by far was Flatliners.
The original Flatliners?
No, the original Flatliners is amazing.
Okay.
The remake, I was literally sitting in the theater, flipping the screen off and being like, turn it off. It lacked any of the real unsettling aspects of the original film. The original one still, if I watch it, will make me feel disturbed. This new one tried to get so clinical and cold that it just killed all the imagination, and it was terrible. And for me, it was the worst remake. Now, I think the Friday the 13th remake that happened was actually good, and that they should have kept going with that one. But Flatliners, House of Wax, House of Wax with that was so originally, a classic and a great horror film. And then they decide like, hey, let's remake it with like Paris Hilton and a guy from One Tree Hill or whatever that show was. And it's just like, no, please, no one needs this.
That one was a complete reimagining too. It was just your monster of the week. There's a house that's got wax all over it, and they just find it somewhere, go into it, and then it's like there's a guy who's gonna kill people. There's no backstory, there's no nothing. Whereas the original House of Wax, which was not with Vincent Price, there was like 20 years before that, in like the 30s, there's a guy who is an artist, and there's a whole, like the whole first 15 or 20 minutes of the movie is his, like essentially his current story. It's not his backstory, it's what his life is. And some guy wants to do an insurance scheme and set the place on fire, and the guy gets injured. And then he comes back with like another guy, and he does these waxworks figures. The other guy is like his mute partner who does his sculpting for him, allegedly. And then the other guy, they're secretly like taking people, picking like usually women to kill for his waxworks life-size diorama scenes, but there's real women inside the wax figures. That's how they look so realistic, because the guy's not sculpting, they're just killing these people and dipping them in wax. And then in the remake, it's with Vincent Price, which is even better than the original. It's great. And there's this part where he's all horribly disfigured because he himself is a wax figure. He's made a wax mask for himself of his face, and you don't get to see that until the very end. I'm seriously not holding back on spoilers for a movie that's nearly 100 years old. This is Vincent Price. You have to go see this, even though you know exactly what's going to happen. It's awesome. It's usually in a 2-pack. You get both of these movies for the price of nothing. It's easy. They're easy to find. That movie's great, but I went positive for a second because the original House of Wax is amazing. Forget that Paris Hilton one. What do you have for our negative bubble here that we're gonna then throw down the stairs?
For my negative bubble is similar to the remakes, and that is when they cash cow a concept. It's like
what we were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah, like zombie movies, slasher movies
they go too far.
Some of the worst offenders because you can make them cheap.
Yeah.
And people will go and see it for the thing alone. And then when people are like, oh, you like those movies? Or, oh, another one of those movies? Yeah. It's like you actually have to go dig for a good one or convince people that there are still good ones to go see it.
What's the worst one, do you think, in that? Because for me, it's any number of... I mean, I'm hearing good things about zombie movies, in recent years, but I cannot force myself to watch them, even with Capaldi playing a Who doctor in one of them.
Yeah, that's
HW.
Yeah,
that movie was a huge disappointment for me.
Was it World War Z?
Yes.
A lot of people liked it, or they seem to.
Yeah, but of course I read the book, own the book, and
wait, was Mark Wahlberg in that?
No, it was Brad Pitt.
Oh. Edit that part out.
Yeah, do not confuse Mark Wahlberg for Brad Pitt. There is no comparison.
I forgot who was
Brad Pitt's superiority.
I didn't see the movie.
I was going to say, side note, there is a little bit of a comparison because Mark Wahlberg said that he gets roles because Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise pass on him. But anyway, no, because
Or Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Like, was Leonardo
Maybe that's what it
DiCaprio
was. Maybe
supposed
it was
to be
Brad
in
Pitt.
Boogie Nights, and he was
That's
like,
what it
"No,
was.
I'm not
Leo and
touching
Brad
that."
Pitt passing on roles.
And then Mark Wahlberg was like, "I'll do it. I'll play a porn star."
But the World War Z was just completely off the mark because one, the book was actually written by Mel Brooks' son.
Really?
Yes.
I somehow forgot about that.
Yes. And he very much holds to the idea of the Romero zombie, of it being this slow, meandering thing. The fear is not that they're faster than you, it's that they don't stop, but they still look like us.
And the numbers.
Yeah. The book was actually written in a very interesting way. It's like the zombie apocalypse has already happened. It's over. And this one man is going around the world interviewing survivors and talks about people's perspectives from different stages of the outbreak. From like where it started, what happened at the beginning, what happened in the middle, how do people feel now? And it's very much written like a series of interview questions that's been transcribed. And so I think even like the audio book written out, like one guy reads the questions and then they got another actor to play the role of the interviewee. But
Sounds cool.
the movie was
As if it's in current,
like it's
happening
happening
currently.
right now. The whole concept of the zombie goes against Max Brooks's idea of what the zombie was when he wrote it.
Are they fast?
Yeah, they're more like an insect plague instead of a meandering horde.
Anecdote about Mel Brooks, one of my favorite directors, except for the high anxiety wasn't good. But when he was looking to produce The Elephant Man, I think they were looking for a director, and then they went to go see Racerhead, and then Lynch came out. They watched it, and Lynch was like, "Well, good knowing you fellas," because he thought, like, they're not gonna give me this job based on watching this film. That's how lucid and like rational and down to earth David Lynch actually is. He's realistic about his art, and I think that's wonderful. And Mel Brooks came out and shook his hand and hugged him and said, "You're a madman, I love you," you know. So, and that got him the job. So and he made The Elephant Man with John Hurt, who is under all those heavy prosthetics and sometimes just a hood over his head. That's John Hurt, 1984, the War Doctor, and everything in between.
Interesting. And just a little story that goes along a little bit with that one, because we were talking about the unnecessary like additions to franchises and stuff with like Jason X and whatever, you know. And of course the big cash cow grabber was Freddy versus Jason, which was supposed to turn into like a whole lot more things. That one was actually massively successful. It was not really a good film, but it gave people just enough of what they wanted that it was a big global box office success, but not enough to like spur the kind of franchise that they wanted to off of that and bringing other killers into it. You know, they were talking about bringing in all of the slashers and stuff. And I saw just yesterday an interview, I think it was, where they were talking about having Freddy versus Jason versus Ash. And this was actually in development and being discussed with all the actors and everything. And they called Bruce Campbell, you know, and was like, okay, this might really be happening. Are you in? Freddy versus Jason versus Ash. Let's make it happen. And he said, he immediately said, sure, yeah, I'll go ahead and that'd be great. I finally get to kill those guys. And then he said the phone just went dead. Like, what? Hello? I said I'm in. Oh, Ash can't win. I'm out.
How else the would it go? I mean, unless it's like a draw or something, and I don't know, or like he would have to team up with one of the other ones. I'm assuming Jason.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like that
script
was
is leaked online.
unnecessary. The whole thing. Like I like them in their own categories. I don't really need to see them fight and stuff because you can't please the audience. You have to have it be a draw, or just let them go on and on and on, because clearly Team Freddy. But if you're being realistic, would Freddy beat Jason? I mean, it's pretty much
yes, he would. He's an ethereal being that exists in your dreams. You cannot kill that. Jason is a flesh and whatever person that you could dismember and send off into space. Oh no! What if we send him into space? Has anybody thought of doing that?
It's like I will go Team Ash.
Cyber Jason.
He has went up with the Necronomicon.
He has, and he won.
Yeah, bringing it back to H.P. Lovecraft.
Everything in horror can be tied together.
Clearly the luckiest man alive,
Yeah.
too. Like, he's made of plot armor. I'm kidding about that, of course, but he's so smooth and cool that
You can say
it's
the
such a
wrong
great-
words, still pick up the Necronomicon and win.
Yeah. So, all right, we actually had a fair amount of positivity in there and joking around about some of this. Is there something? Well, I guess since Becky's our guest, she has I'm not gonna call it her flavor of the week, but she does have a new favorite genre of horror that we talked about a little bit last time. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on in horror today? Because A24 is dominating, and with a lot of their indie-ish type films that are not horror, they're just making everything that's good right now. But they're famous for horror. Some people think they only make horror films.
That is true. They have
they
branched
don't.
out and they've done new things. You know, they did Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is not horror, but their horror movies are my current favorites. So many of them. We already discussed Midsommar, Hereditary, The Witch, all of those. I don't think I mentioned It Follows, but that's another A24 film that was great. And their most recent success that I didn't get to talk about was Talk to Me. Talk to Me is brand new this year, A24. And A24 also, let's give them a shout out because they immediately agreed to give their writers and people like that whatever they wanted. They're like, our studio can't exist. We can't work without you. So they just immediately greenlit and was like, whatever conditions we need to do to keep going, we're going.
Yeah, that made them
And they
exempt
did not-
from the strike.
Yeah, they
because
were exempt
just
from the
agreed
strike.
to the terms.
And they are the most outside the box studio. And if you haven't seen Talk to Me, I highly recommend that one. That one's been my movie of the year so far. It was so good that they've actually gone ahead and greenlit a sequel, which A24 never does. I've never seen a sequel to any of these awesome like A24 films. But this one apparently got greenlit for a sequel, and I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I
feel
think
like it's
Tyler
a great
does. Tyler knows how he feels about it without seeing the movie.
standalone.
It opens that door to Jason in space. We're going to have...
Talk to Me in
say-
space.
yeah.
Didn't A24 also greenlight all the sequels for X?
Those are not sequels.
Well, one's a prequel.
Okay, that's kind of its own thing. It was a prequel. Well, they started in the middle, then went to the prequel, and now are going to the sequel with Maxine. So it's the continuation of one story. It's just told in a non-linear fashion. It's a trilogy. But
That's
that was
a sequel, Becky. That's what that is. Okay, so those are A24 films
Yeah.
too? Okay, so they've done it twice.
Ty West.
So if that was, and that may have been presented
but yeah,
prior
Ty
to-
West presented it as a 3-part story.
Okay. So if something's presented as a 3-part thing, no more, no less, then that's 3 movies. It's not really sequel, prequel, what, I mean, it is if it's you're telling one part, then another part, and then another part, depending on where you put it. But the thing that you hate, and the thing I agree with you about is if we make something and then it's like, let's see if we can make more money on it. And we'll just come up with a new idea later. And it does not matter what it is as long as it has Freddy Krueger in the title or whatever. And then we can do whatever. And some of them are going to be good and some of them are going to be bad. This is especially indicative of horror movies because people just go see them.
You can usually make them cheaper.
And you can make them cheaper. It doesn't, the special effects are so cheap. Teenagers make them all the time. There's so many ARGs and horror things that are actually, some of which you can find for free, and people categorize them on certain podcasts, and you can find out which are the good ones and which aren't. They're on YouTube. You can go see a better horror thing than most movies you're going to pay $20 for at the theater on YouTube right now that are going to deliver the same feeling that you have. So let's hope. I haven't seen Talk to Me. I've only heard good things. Australia's podcast, The Weekly Planet, I listen to pretty regularly. Talk to Me is set in Australia, so they don't do a lot of horror movies, but they made an exception for this one because it is from their own backyard.
I think that's why A24 is doing so well right now. People call it elevated horror, but it's not really its own genre. I think it's just people were tired of seeing the same thing over and over.
Bad stuff.
Yeah. And so it's just like, let's actually make a good narrative.
If you have a studio that only takes in the cream of the crop and only lets in writers that have new ideas and it's not not just another, hey, I wonder what's going to come out in 3 years' time. Is it another reboot of Halloween? I bet it is.
There's already talks about how they're going
Of course.
to where they're going to go from like Halloween Ends. And I've heard a couple of different possibilities, and I just personally hope that they retcon David Gordon Green's stuff and just like it never happened. Like but doesn't need to have happened.
Even other things like The Omen, The Exorcist, it's not just Friday the 13th, Scream, Alien. I'm just looking at your list here. Mm-hmm. There's so many that, and like not even as a concept, like if you say how many, like Dracula is going to get made every 10 years or so in some form or another. And isn't Guillermo del Toro doing a Frankenstein?
I've heard that.
Yes,
I've heard that.
Now that one's one I'm
and of course Robert Eggers is doing
too.
Nosferatu.
Yeah,
very excited for that.
Some of these are good things, that can be remade. I'd love to see a remake of Dr. Caligari. Anybody that's listening, free idea. Here's your backstory. The two guys that are in love with the same girl. Build that up. It's one scene in the original movie. There's your story. Make that be the whole story, and then do all the other weird German stuff. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say with A24, you're talking about like I think it's because they do it well. Not even that they're doing anything new. Because like going back to X, there's nothing that happened in that movie that caught me by surprise. Every death I've pretty much seen coming, but they did it well, and I think that's where it stands out.
Yeah, like with Edgar Wright, I haven't said his name. We've mentioned his movies quite a bit, but when Shaun of the Dead came out, people were like, have you seen this movie? It's really good. And I was like, no, I don't like zombie movies. They seem boring and repetitive to me, and it's just a bunch of jump scares. Or they throw in, what's the one where it's like, it's showing the zombies, like just the camera pans, zombies, camera pans, zombies, and then Michael Jackson jumps out, a guy dressed as Michael Jackson, and does a little dance move, and then jumps. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's one of like this happened. It wasn't, this is a real thing. Somebody was showing me this movie back when I was in high school, and I was like, this is dumb. Like, what is this, a parody? Like, why throw that in the middle of a serious movie? I say in quotations. So I watched Shaun of the Dead, and I was like, this is a really good movie. So there's two. There's Night of the Living Dead and this one. For me, that's for me. I'm not downplaying. If you love zombie movies, that's fair. That's fine, because this is a real thing. It's not a real thing that could happen. But if it were a real thing that could happen, humanity would be over in a week, because people are stupid and they run upstairs when they should be looking for a better place to go and use their mind, and people freak out and they do dumb things when they get stressed. It is truly a terrifying thing. But like you said, a lot of them are not made well. So when you have a company that specifically only takes good writers, good directors, good actors, and excludes the rest, and does willing
to take risks. That's a big thing. They are willing to take risks and do ideas that other studios would have shot down.
Yeah, because they're not necessarily, Everything Everywhere All at Once blew everything out of the water, and I thought, this is going to be my own little special movie. Like, I'm only going to know about it. I'm only going to see it, and it's going to be my thing. And then it blew up everywhere, and everybody was talking about it. And I was like, good, that's great, because it's a great piece of cinema. It's a great story, and it shouldn't, it's not the sort of thing I would have expected to, because it is so strange, and it's got a lot of weird imagery in it that I think a normal viewing audience typically would not have wanted to see. But I think we're into a new age of cinema where people, maybe society as a whole, is willing to accept something beyond their normal comfort level. I don't know. Maybe there's a lot of movies that are getting made that you would think of as indie films, but they're not indie films anymore. And then there's a lot of movies like we talked about last week. I think one of Rain Man, I think, was the biggest film of that year, like 88 or 87 or something. And that's what would be an indie film today. So things have obviously shifted, and I hope they're shifting back. And I hope that more people can make high art and other people will accept it. And the normal, we don't have to gatekeep this. Normal people can like nice things. Andy Warhol said in the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. And he was true. He saw YouTube coming, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. And maybe not on a technological scale, but on a broader sense. I think the reason why he painted the Campbell soup can, I don't think he wanted people to like it. I think he wanted to spark a debate. This is my opinion. Please, if I'm absolutely 100% wrong, tell me and prove me wrong, because I've been saying this for some time. I think what he wanted was for people to say, it's bad. And the imaginary conversation would go as follows. Why? Well, it isn't art. Okay, why? it's not a, like, well, what is art? A Da Vinci or a Rembrandt or something. Okay, so you like those. You have a favorite artist? Not really. Do you go to museums? No. Galleries? No. Most of them are free. Why not? I'm just a regular, everyday, average Joe. But you have such strong feelings about this Campbell soup can and what art is. Did you ever think about that? Maybe you should go. Maybe you do have an interest in art. Maybe you should do some art. Maybe you'll find you're an artist. And there you have it. Art being brought to the masses to spark a debate, to say, what is art? And we have that now with cinema. A lot of people the reason why cinema is dying or was dying is because people give their money to bad things and support bad things when we could really be supporting good things. And A24 said, hold my beer, and they've brought us a lot of good things, and we have shown up for it. So let's continue to do that.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think that they're actually, we call it elevated horror because we got so used to everything else. But there is a place for all of that. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm only on elevated horror. If they make another whatever movie, Scream 7, Scream 7's going to come out, and I'm going to go see it because
you're a horror fan, and that's your thing. That's your niche
It's
thing.
always going to appeal to me. All of these genres and subgenres that we've discussed, I'm going to be interested in just because I'm interested in horror. But yeah, I think that A24 has raised the bar to show us the potential of how artistic and beautiful and more meaningful that genre can be.
Final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I'm going to say that with A24, not all of their stuff is for me, but I will admit it is quality stuff, and I hope we see more of that from whatever studio.
Yeah, I'm not just saying it's just them. I think there's other studios that have made good things, and recently the Shyamalan movie, Knock at the Cabin, it wasn't A24.
No.
There's any studios capable of this. Any indie and underground filmmakers capable of this. Just be better. And yeah.
And what do you think? Wrap up there?
Yeah. And like look up that cat.
Don't look up the cat. If you made it with us this far, thank you. Comment. Let us know.
You're a trooper.
What's your favorite subgenre of horror? Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. And until next time.
And send us donations.
And until next time, see you.